on the Alive and Social Network. Another edition of the Landscape and Garden Show with Bob and BT. That's still the name of the show. We're still looking for a new one. Hi, Bob Harvey.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I am good. Good to see you here. Let's set the scene for our podcast listeners here today. As we did our show last week, we had a springtime day that was projected to be 70 degrees. We had the windows of the Alive and Social Network studio room wide open to South Minneapolis because the final high temp that day, I believe, was 84. Mm-hmm. I knew it was somewhere in the low to mid-80s, so that was something else. Today, we've got a bit of a cloud-covered day and something in the 40s. So there's a springtime in Minnesota for you, played out just 1 week apart.
A reality check.
A reality check, indeed. Last week when we did the show, we were talking about a lot of different things, and of course, the notion of getting your fingers in the dirt and getting the boots and the waffle stompers caked with mud came up because that's what it's all about. And I brought up a quote from the great Margaret Atwood, the Canadian writer. In the spring, at the end of the day, you should smell like dirt. Love that. You should probably have some under your fingernails, too. Mm-hmm. That's absolutely true. I'll go to Mark Twain right now, and also American author Henry Van Dyke, to kind of piggyback on what we were just talking about, the differences in weather that can happen in the springtime. Mark Twain. In the spring, I have counted 136 different kinds of weather inside of 4 and 20 hours. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll be here all week. Thank you. That was Mark Twain. I can't take credit for that. And from Henry Van Dyke, I love this one. The first day of spring is one thing, and the first spring day is another. The difference between them is sometimes as great as a month. All right, one more. Seeing as how we had 2 Major League Baseball teams start their season over the weekend, and then on Monday of this week, we had the other 28 teams get their season underway. From the great Rogers Hornsby, the great baseball player from back in the day, people ask me, what do I do in winter when there's no baseball? Rogers Hornsby said, I'll tell you what I do. I stare out the window and wait for spring. Indeed. Some springtime quotes on the Landscape and Garden Show. We're still looking for an official name for the program here, for the podcast, and so we want to throw this out on the front end of the show here once again. Bob, give us your email address for folks to put their suggestions in.
They can send it to designers at edelweissdesign.com. That's EDELWEISS design.com.
All right, edelweissdesign.com is designers
with an
plural
S.
At edelweissdesign.
Just like the song.
.com. You didn't sing for us last week. By the way, my email address, btvoice, BEETEA, voice, at gmail.com. So send along your suggestions for names for the show. I mean, the Landscape and Garden Show with Bob and BT is serviceable, but to call it anywhere near poetic, to call it prosaic, that would be incorrect. No, we're looking for something that has a little more pizzazz, a little more jazz, a little more something. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, you know what I'm saying. Or funky. It could be a funky name, whatever it may be.
You know where they're going to get all that is in the content, because we're going to have a lot of fun with this venture. And I'm very excited about that.
I am excited, too. Are you going to sing for us to start the show today?
Well, maybe not to start, but why don't we save it? Why don't we talk a little bit about the why?
Oh, so we got a little singing tease going on.
Yes.
Okay.
We don't want them to shut off the podcast as soon as they've turned it on.
You, my friend, have a lovely singing voice, and that's why I wanted to fit it in as quickly as possible, as more of an enticement, but I love your tease even more. I like the tease even more, so we'll tease our podcast listeners.
I may not have a wonderful quote to offer, as you have just now offered so many little reflections.
Well,
but
thank you. That was just Google springtime quotes. So I'm not taking much credit for it.
Well, it's fitting. But what I'd see, because music is an important part of my life as well, is that the whole experience working in the field of landscape design and landscape architecture, those formal names are just the tip of the iceberg of what really is experiential in the whole process of dealing and enjoying and experiencing the great outdoors.
That's really what it's about. It's an experience.
For me, it is orchestrating a symphony.
Oh, nice.
Of absolute, unexpected, high points, low points, melodies that move through the landscape. It's a moving, three-dimensional experience. And that may sound a little esoteric starting off, but as we get into these series of shows that we're going to be doing together, you will see there's a lot of things that come together that help you understand there's multiple layers of the whys. We do the things that we do in the landscape, and understanding the knowledge and the application together.
I would say that even beyond layers, there's three-dimensionality here that you'll glean from what we're going to do here during the course of our shows, and that is you've got the layers, which would imply up and down, so to speak.
Yes.
You're gonna learn more about the left and right, the back and forward. You're going to learn about depth and height. You're going to learn about a lot, and then also, may I add, this might be four-dimensional, and I don't want to get too esoteric here, but there's other dimensions, and one of those dimensions here in the landscape and gardening world is the dimension of time. And that's another layer, if you will, or another dimension, if you will, that you'll discover as we go along.
Plays a huge role, because out of the whole time line comes sentiment.
Oh, yeah.
And sentiment builds with new experiences, but it also, a lot of those new experiences are built on experiences that have happened in our earlier years and with other people. And the landscape can serve as a reminder, as a sense and a source of comfort, also stimulation for all the senses, and celebration.
Indeed, and that'll be one of the
and
topics.
Recreation.
And certainly recreation. And the doing of it is recreation, and that's what you should
we have
consider.
The spectation and the participation.
Nice, very nice. Among our topics today, that sort of planting an early seed with people in your life. We'll get to that in a second. We'll give you a lineup of what you can expect on our Landscape and Garden Show coming up in just a moment. But I do have one more quote as long as we're getting started. Robin Williams, the late, great Robin. Spring is nature's way of saying, oh, let's party. And away we go. Let's recap what happened last week, because we had an outstanding show. Our thanks again to Eric Melby from Meridian Tree Experts. What an interesting cat, by the way. Go back and listen to last week's show, and then listen. Speaking of layers and dimensionality, listen to the layers and dimensions that this tree guy brought to the program. I love his background. He's a college grad, psychology guy in school. Didn't he have another degree too? And I'm forgetting right now. But the one that struck me the most was the psychology degree, among other studies that he pursued while he was in college. But Eric Melby made a decision then, getting out of college as a young man. I'm not cut out for the cubicle world, or I'm not cut out for the office world, and the things I've studied in college taught me about higher learning and taught me the process of learning, which is always a valuable lesson, if nothing else. Certainly he learned more than that. But the thing he did learn about himself was that being an indoor guy was not going to work for Eric Melby. And so he chose the pathway of being outdoors, being among the great creatures of the planet that are the treescape and the tree world. And he's been going ever since with Meridian Tree Experts. So what I'm saying is listen to some of the insights that he brings to us on last week's show. And I think you'll feel some of those influences of his background, his education, sort of the psychology of working with clients and working with trees.
It's a synthesis of all the gifts that he has.
He was a great guest.
In the more corporate professional environment, and then applying that into an environment that's constantly moving and changing and is outdoors, and sometimes stereotyped. We should talk a little about that at one of our segments, how people can stereotype those whose gifts are really geared towards creating great, wonderful outdoor experiences.
Or working with plants, or working with animals, or any number of things. And I can see the notion that you're just planting corn and milking cows. Yeah. Oh, Mr. or Mrs. Farmer, how smart are you? Yeah. My Uncle George. And then my cousins, Lauren and Larry, who took over the farm after my Uncle George up in the Wadena, Verndale area. Three of the smartest guys I know. Absolutely wisest, smartest guys I know. Another thing.
They'll probably live a long time,
I think so, too. Yep, absolutely. Hip replacements notwithstanding, Uncle George still chugging strong. One of my favorite peeps to hang out with at family reunions, just because we're never at a shortage of things to talk about. Also, I wanted to toss this out because we began our show, we like every show, with a little chat before the microphones are turned on. We do a little. Bob and I do that, and we have guests, and we're chatting a little bit, and then we get the podcast underway. And I mentioned, because I saw his last name, Melby, and I mentioned, and it was really an off-the-cuff thing. Geez, Eric, maybe you're related to one of my favorite junior high school teachers. And sure enough, that's his uncle. The late Dennis Melby, who really was. He was just an outstanding cat. And again, one of my favorite teachers in junior high school in the Robbinsdale School District.
I'll be darned.
And it was just the sweetest small world thing that got us smiling at each other before we even began the podcast. So,
one of the things that really sold me on Eric and his profession and his contribution was in our business of landscape architecture. There's so many things to be considered as part of the vision.
Yep.
And when you are bringing in multiple entities that are going to be having impact on the end result of that vision, you need people that can envision what is going to be going on and can offer advice and support and the expertise necessary. So he has a general, real concern for the outcome, not just come in and get out and just do your job of pruning or tree removal or whatever. He really is a big picture guy, and his contribution only enhances our process to completion.
He brought it up also in the context of not just landscape architecture, as we were chatting last week, but basic architecture. So you're starting with the clean slate of a lot, and you're getting ready to build on it.
Right.
And a guy like Eric and landscape architects and designers like yourself, everybody needs to come together to make sure that the overall game plan for the lay of the house, where the shade's going to happen, where the sun's going to happen, all of the things that go in shrub-wise and otherwise, that needs to be an integral part of that planning. And a lot of people forget that. They think, I want this house design, I want my house to look like this, I want it to be positioned on my lot like this. And getting some of that bearing and some of that advice from the perspective of, okay, what's going to surround that house right from the get-go is a key element in having a happy, long life in that house.
Exactly, because once it's done, it's very difficult to correct. And
Especially
a lot of times we look at our design prototypes in home building design and architecture out of a catalog or a book.
Yep.
And sometimes we don't get all the environmental surrounds just due to space limitations or whatever that can give us a full picture. And experiencing the space is where it all starts.
Yeah, absolutely. You see that image of a home in the newspaper. Oh, that design, like the home plans you see in the newspaper. Oh, I like that's something like that, and you just get too caught up in that and not what other things need to be factored in.
Right, and then all the homework's done up front, where you get the information you need both from the site itself and from the client of the needs, desires, and wants, and then you translate that into a product.
Indeed.
And it's synergistic between inside and outside.
And that's a big part of the landscape ethos that you bring to play when it comes to working with clients, that it's not just what's happening outside on the deck and beyond the deck, it's what happens between the outside and the inside. They all have to work as one organic whole.
Right.
Today on the show, we will dive into, time permitting, something that we left off with last week that we wanted to get in more on. And we're going to continue with some of this theme, by the way, on shows ahead, because springtime's going to last a while. And containers and spring planters, as we're going to get into today a little bit, aren't just springtime things. Obviously, container planting continues into the summer and into the autumn. And for a lot of folks, those fall colors, as they swap out things in the containers, are as important as any other time of year, because you got the leaves falling, etc., and you just want to bring a little bit more of that color and pizzazz back into your landscape. So we'll continue with containers, and let's just call them seasonal planters. That's probably a better way to refer to it. But of course, spring planters for us today. Kids and gardening. Now's the time to think about what are you going to do if you've got some little kids in your family, or medium or older kids. But if they want to get involved and you want to be involved with them in the outdoors, and pun intended here, plant some seeds with those kids in regard to their relationship with the outdoors and gardening, now's the time to do it, especially when they're little ones. Some early planting how-tos will be a part of the show today. And also, I want to dive into this with you a little bit, Bob. And I'm just going to use the state's name, and then we'll leave it at that, okay? because I think everybody's seen enough about the news and the reservoirs dropping and the restrictions from Governor Brown. So all I'm going to say is California. All righty, and we'll get to California for a bit during the course of the show. Let's recap last week. We mentioned thanks again to Eric Melby from Meridian Tree Experts, Trees and Shrubs, Things to Do Now. We also talked last week about taking an inventory of what you got going on, starting on the lawn, and then also developing your spring and summer plans. So let's begin with trimming trees and shrubs and what Eric had to say to us last week. So now, here we are, another week into April. What's your take on what Eric left us with last week, Bob? And where should we be with the trees and shrubs to make sure that we get things done on a timely manner?
Well, our weather has cooled significantly, so we're back down to very, very late winter, early spring conditions. We've had a little bit of moisture. The ground temperature is still pretty cool. 184-degree day isn't going to shoot that soil temperature up very much, except the top inch or so in southern locations. So our conditions haven't changed a whole lot on the pruning end, except probably with regard to oaks. So following Eric's advice from the previous podcast, you're probably pretty safe. I probably another week on elm, and then all of our shrubbery that blooms in the summer. We're shaping all those. My company's been out all week doing all that pruning. You know, we didn't have this window as conveniently last year at this time.
That's a good
Remember,
point to
there's
bring
still
up.
over a foot of snow on the ground.
Exactly.
It was still very cold at night. And even logistically, it was hard to get out and do work because you really couldn't assess. In the assessment process is also looking at what has been damaged. And some of the damage didn't even reveal itself until the ground started to thaw and the temperature rose.
Well into May.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, evergreens weren't showing their brown until March or April.
Yeah.
And so you wanted to wait and see. It was more wait and see what made it before you could take action. This year, we didn't have to wait. We could actually get going on pruning end of February.
Yeah.
So a couple examples, like a lot of folks own have hydrangeas planted in their landscape. And there's a plethora of varieties. But generally, they're a summer to late summer, early fall blooming shrub, woody shrub. Great time now to shape those. Cut off the old dead heads if you haven't done that already, because we use them in containers and things like that, recycle them.
As a mulch?
No, we would take the dead flowers that are kind of stiff, in the fall, and we'll spray paint them or use the natural color to put in the fall containers.
I got you. I see what you're saying there.
Like that. Yeah, they can be ground up. If you got a little home mulch or whatever, you can ground that stuff up or compost the non-woody material. The woody material is going to take a long time to break down. But so that's a summer example of a summer blooming plant. The Weigela family would be an example. The Weigelias are really wonderful.
Except for the one behind one of my yew plants on my landscape.
What's it doing to you?
Oh, it's totally rabbit devastated.
It was girdled? It's a Weigelia?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. Like, and we talked about some of those critter issues, and we'll get into a little bit of that on the show today too. But oh boy, nothing. From the ground up about 6 inches, 8 inches, even on some of the branches coming out, it's just there's no bark at all. Yeah, they were hungry.
So if you have shrubs that bloom after June 1st, you could be pruning those now.
Okay.
If they're blooming before June 1st, you leave them alone until after bloom, i.e. lilacs, forsythia, early spring blooming things, red buds.
I've got a Miss Kim tree, lilac tree, that it's just getting too gangly. It only comes up about 4-5 feet, and then it just does this nice crown, but it's just getting gangly. So I have to take your advice here. Let it bloom this year, and then after that, because I want to shape it back into sort of a nice little ball shape.
I akin those, and you see this a lot in Europe. They almost look like chia pets on a standard. But it's a nice look if you have several of them, and it's a formal look.
Yeah.
But you do have to have some control because in their natural growth state, they can get to be quite large. So if you're okay with that, and it gets up to 12 plus feet, then you can let it go. But some people like to be able to manage those kinds of ornamental shrubs a little bit to keep that statement alive in the landscape.
Let me ping off that for just a second here, because others may have a similar issue with lilacs or other things that they want to have more ornamentally sculpted and ornamentally shaped. And so we'll just use mine as an example. Comes up off the ground, pretty decent trunk, about 5 feet, and then it just branches out, and it goes up a little bit, but really it just grew out
wide
laterally. Now I really want to tighten that thing up into a tighter ball. Do I have to worry about how thick some of those branches are or anything like that, or can I just sort of, after it blooms, more or less shape it the way that I want to, and then just let nature take its course with new shoots and
you want to look
flowers?
for any damaged or rubbing branches, and decide which ones should stay and ones you can sacrifice, and then if it's less than a half inch, quarter inch, you can use a head shears literally and just shear the whole thing into the shape you want. Preferably sharp shears. If you're using hand pruners, I like Felcos that are sharp. Clean cut.
I've got some nice. I got a nice Felco. Yeah.
Lilacs are very resilient, but when you're doing the same application on other things that may be a little more sensitive or have more disease vulnerability, you want to use clean, sharp materials and maybe even sterilize them.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that too.
When you're moving from one thing to another.
Is that as easy as doing an alcohol rub or something like that?
Yeah, just a little alcohol on it. Yep.
All right.
Yep. And soap and water, hot water and soap too. But that's a little harsh on the tool itself. So I would go with the alcohol.
That's funny. I want to have you repeat this, and let's repeat it again, because I think this is lost on folks a lot of times. Just you got to sometimes clean those tools between different plants.
Right.
You can spread a lot of disease inadvertently for the same reason as washing your hands can do that. The same thing happens with your garden tools, especially that shear that's going into the live plant material and then potentially right away going to another one.
It's also true as chainsaws, and I have an excellent example.
I wouldn't have thought of that.
Tell
but yes,
you,
of course.
if you're doing larger stuff and you're using a chainsaw, excuse me. I remember several years ago, and I won't mention exactly where I saw this happening, but it was in a municipality that was doing their late winter prune, and they were...
You're not going to mention the city because you just want to hold on to your license there. Don't you, right?
No, let's say this. I did not observe this in Minneapolis. I did not observe this in Minneapolis.
The city's arborist happens to be a friend of mine. I just, I want to hold on.
We do a great job in Minneapolis. That's why I live here. So, but they were pruning out elms and clearing some elms from power lines and things like that. And they just went right down the block in the alleys.
Just going.
And so what they did was... There was probably some elms that were infected with Dutch elm disease. So a month or two later, when the trees had leafed out, every single place that there had been a cut with a chainsaw, the infection ignited, and there were all these.
Wow!
And so the trees were gone that summer. But every single cut had so it is important to sterilize when you're working in the woods and you're choosing between the high quality premium trees and the others that aren't so great. Generally, if they're highly susceptible to specific disease, in this case it's an elm. We have another case would be oak with oak wilt.
The oak wilt, yeah.
So, and then from there they're a little more scattered and not as common.
Real quick here, because I want to move on, but how do you sterilize, or how do you make sure that chainsaw is good to go?
I don't know that I can answer that fully. I would think the alcohol treatment would be. Yep, we'll ask Eric.
I would imagine if you've got a spray bottle that you could probably just fill with some isopropyl alcohol. That might not be a bad thing to sort of add to the garden inventory, the shed inventory, or whatever you've got, the shelf in the garage. That's not a bad idea. Just clearly right on there, isopropyl alcohol, the kind of thing where you could spray it on your shears, spray it on your hedge trimmer, whatever the case may be, and get that alcohol in there on the chain of the chainsaw, because it's just going to evaporate and dry anyhow. It's not going to cause any corrosion issues, but what it's going to do is that alcohol. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm guessing it's not going to cause any issues like that. It may dry out some of the viscous oil that needs to.
So you want to lubricate.
So you want to lube afterward.
Yeah.
But all that said, that might. And then wipe down. You maybe wipe down the Felco or anything,
and then back down to the more annual, perennial kind of thing. And roses, particularly, you can be moving diseases all through your vegetables and flowers and things. So it where you don't see a problem and you're not mixing up a lot of plant metaphors, if you will. You're pretty good. But when you're moving from one area to another, and some of these diseases actually are transferred by host plants, that kind of thing, then you want to be careful.
I don't want this to sound like an endorsement because we're not getting paid by the folks, but I'll say this, and I think you'll echo my sentiments because we've been talking about the Felco here for the last couple of minutes. Mm-hmm. And the pair I bought, they cost me, I don't know, $65, $70 or whatever it was, and you can buy replacement blades. But it's a brand name of garden shear. It comes with you see the garden folks and the landscape folks carrying them around all the time because it's the professional grade. And all I'm saying is after going through a half a dozen to a dozen cheap shears over the X number of years, all of which wore out. And then when they do wear out, the replacement blades are difficult to find, and you're doing damage to the plant when you're shearing. It was one of the best $65, $70 investments I've ever made in my gardening history, is having those Felco shears and just always strapping them on my belt whenever I'm out in the garden. They're amazing.
I think a person feels empowered when they have Felcos in their hands.
True. You do. You
it's
feel like a different level of gardener.
The world on the gardening world. It's
you look at that,
don't mess with me.
You look at that Felco, and it's like that Paul Williams song starts coming in, the one the Carpenters sang. You and me against the world. It's just like you and me against the world. You're right. You feel so empowered. You feel mighty, mighty in the garden for sure. All right, let's move on to recapping taking an inventory. Here we are, April. Where should we be inventory-wise? Okay, again, we're looking at those dead plants out there, the rascals that didn't survive, the evergreens out there. Any other things that we should be thinking about right now when it comes to this sort of, the rest of April, May, early June, that inventory mindset? Where do we need to be right now, Bob Harvey?
Well, just use an example of in my own situation is that when you get rid of all the clutter and all the debris and everything, and there's this initial appearance of freshness, even if it's still brown. It's really great to see, and then you go, okay, now what can I envision here, or what am I missing that I want to do differently than I've been doing the same thing every year for the last 12 years or whatever? How has my lifestyle changed, and am I getting my needs met on a, the landscape can give us things through production. So we talk about gardening for food production. Is it giving me what I'm looking for in terms of recreation? Is there? We're putting in bocce courts for some clients now. That great backyard activity, and of course the sport courts and those kinds of things. Swimming pools, waterfalls, natural swimming pools. That's a whole nother subject that'll be coming up, and then. What does our landscape give us in terms of just aesthetic, our sanctuary experience? What is it that visually pleases us about, a lot of people need that decompression time and that time to appreciate the beauty that's around them, even if it's a 12 by 12.
Sure.
Because we do postage stamp landscapes. I mean, literally thumbprint kind of areas where you can create a lot of excitement and a lot of interest in a very small space. They're the most challenging, in my opinion.
I would think so.
Something that's 60 acres that we're going to look at next week.
Painting in miniature. I mean,
exactly.
Think about a large canvas.
Yeah. And everything is chosen very carefully with a purpose and how it relates to everything else.
Yeah, think about doing the Mona Lisa on a postage stamp.
Right. And then your site conditions, have they changed? Has the soil conditions changed? Has the light conditions changed? Maybe you lost a big shade tree and your shade garden is now a sun garden. How do you make that transition? What about things in terms of entertainment? We talked about recreation. We talked about production. There's a category of entertainment. Outdoor cooking, grilling, tying in the experience that makes it
How are
easy.
How are you going to use your space?
And attractive. It doesn't have to be ugly. You don't need 4 different kinds of grills because you do 4 different kinds of food preparation. You can do everything you need to do on one type of grill. It can meet all your needs.
Sure.
We have a grill that bakes. We can bake cookies and pies on our grill. It's really exciting.
That's cool.
So, and then kind of a projection of a time frame, and we can help you with that because we were giving the information in our podcast about what you should be doing next, that kind of thing. And as we get more feedback from our listeners, then we know where to direct. So, when is the ground ready to work for masonry work? When can I put in a patio? When can I sink some post for a fence? Are there different ways to do that? When do I add my different types of fertilizers or compost to the soil? Those kinds of things. And just ideas, cutting out pictures that all winter long, you get tickled with these little garden magazines and landscape magazines and, wish you were here postcards and promotions from travel agencies and all that. And you start creating a collage or a collection of those things. And then a lot of times when we meet with our clients, it's amazing. They'll open up this, it's like their portfolio, their scrapbook. It's like, well, we like this, and boy, does that expedite getting to the end point because it's visual.
Sure.
So anything visual that can help you.
Even if it's a tropical plant that you really like, that it'll give you a jumping off point to say to a Bob Harvey or whomever, I want it to look like this. What do you got? What should we do?
Think about the Twin Cities where we get people coming from all over the world to live here, all different kinds of climates and cultural traditions. And so, no, a palm tree per se does not survive our winters, but we can give the feeling or the essence of what that palm tree does in its natural environment here with some other things. When I moved here from New England, it was amazing. There was some difference in the Midwest Minnesota landscape from the lush New England next to the ocean kind of landscape and the lush velvety green mountains and Vermont and that kind of thing. And a lot of people here came from that, the transplants from other parts of the country,
moving
either
west
coast,
from out east.
And so replicating some of that was highly desirable by our clients. They said, I want it to feel, I want 4 seasons of color. And back east, there's a tremendous display of spring. So we're coming into our spring now and talk about the things that are starting to come into bloom, like what's blooming, in the Twin Cities now. And there are some things started.
Yes,
so
there are.
Don't give up hope. There's just not enough of them.
Right.
It's like going on a treasure hunt to find.
There's a crocus.
There's a crocus.
There's a daffodil.
There's one forsythia that someone was bold enough to plant.
Indeed.
So it's a visual thing, and it comes out of that sentiment. It's like if you're used to those kinds of things, we can help get those things in that design process.
So the whole taking an inventory at this point is really wrapped into developing your spring and summer plan by, like you said, look at what you've got in your garden, make an assessment of what's there, what's not already surviving or hasn't, because we're hitting those turning points, and then start clipping out those pictures and writing down those ideas and ask a lot of questions. And go ahead and ask questions. Reach Bob at designers@edelweissdesign.com. You can reach me at btvoice, BEETEA voice at gmail.com. If you've got any questions about what's happening at all in your garden, want some ideas about timelines and developing that spring and summer plan, just reach out to us and we can let you know.
Now, for those listeners out there that do spend a lot of time in the participation part of gardening and landscapes, particularly food production, is they really, if they haven't done this already, they really should look at a soil test. And this is still early enough to get the results turned around really quick through the university, go to the Arboretum website, and have a starting point. I mean, if it's something that's so simple to add to the soil, that could make a real big difference in your food production. And different plants have different requirements.
We talked about that last week, especially in regard to the lawn, but also the gardening aspect, the vegetable gardening or the herb gardening aspect. So you might want to get, a couple of soil samples done, maybe one that is the lawn, And then the other is that area where you're going to do that gardening. How much does that cost? I mean, what's a general soil sample? $10, $15, $20?
I think it's pretty reasonable.
Is it affordable? Yeah,
it is
it's
very
reasonable.
affordable. If you don't have a starting point, then you don't know where you're going to end up.
Mm-hmm. So
you could have a problem you're not aware of, and you're wondering why your vegetables don't grow, or your roses aren't doing well, or there's the site considerations include soil, light, and water.
Yeah.
And those three things have to be in harmony and synergy in order to get the maximum benefit out of them. So now's the time to do it. There's not a whole lot else you can do. You can, like I said, we're doing our basic spring cleanup kind of activity, and are assessing the things that need to be revived or put to rest.
Yes, indeed. And find the new guys. Meet the new guys.
Because, what's April's Arbor Day month?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we talk about the trees that we're pruning and removing. How about some suggestions on trees we could be planting?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, we have categories of trees that are planted for aesthetics. So in the aesthetic category, you have the really large-scale trees that provide shade. They have no space limitations. They serve a purpose a lot of times, and particularly historically, when we had such a monoculture of elm trees, many times they were planted in areas where shade was so important on the west sides of houses, and it was our natural form of air conditioning. Now we have lots of options for big shade trees. We can incorporate and diversify our tree canopy in the city so that it's around for many, many generations. And then we have trees of a smaller scale that are a little more ornamental and can fit into those smaller spaces. And there's lots of options there. Just to throw a couple out, that ironwood, for instance, is a native mid-sized tree. It's a moderate to slow grower, but in a small space, it's ideal. It's very attractive. The birch family, lots of options in the birch family.
A little faster grower there. You're going to get a lot more action out of it sooner.
People generally think of crab apples, and they're a double-edged sword in the mind of a lot of people. Continually, there are new cultivars coming out, and they need to be given some credence for their what they offer aesthetically. It's one of those spring booms that we look forward to. The bloom boom
Indeed.
that comes with the crab apples.
And a lot of them are being developed to be less messy too, which is a big important part of that.
Lower fruit production, better branch habit, very high disease resistance. We are very blessed to have a company like Bailey's Nursery here in the Twin Cities. It was one of my first jobs, and I moved out here from New England and got to do I worked in all the different sectors of plant generation, production, and so forth, and seeing the research that goes into coming up with things that work in Minnesota, and they're developed right here.
Isn't that cool?
Which is really, really neat. And so it makes it easier for us who are wanting to do more and more in our landscape. And then the whole food production aspect. I have 3 cherry trees in my yard. Do you ever think of Minnesota as a place to grow cherries?
No, you don't really. Not at all.
No, it's a outdated mindset. We have cherry. In fact, I'll just name one. The North Star cherry was discovered right here in South Minneapolis.
Wow.
Can you believe that?
That's cool.
Yes, and they cultivated.
Do you have one?
I have 2 in my yard.
So 2 of yours are that. Yeah. Isn't that neat?
So anyway, for fruit production, there's plums, cherries, apples, all the different ones that we know about, and there's a whole segment or two just on how application-wise they work, not only for food production, but for an enhancement to the landscape.
I love that.
And that a lot of times messy trees are planted in the wrong place. Like, let's put a messy row of crab apples next to our driveway.
The driveway.
Okay,
that's the first thing I was thinking
because we
too.
need the branches to come straight into the driveway, right where you roll down your window and open your door.
Exactly.
Okay,
Let's do that.
brush your hair for you when you get out. And then you get the wonderful texturizing of the fruit on your finish of
Isn't
your
that
car.
the best?
Oh,
that's just the best.
Yes. So yeah, there's some places that, and we can even control that in small spaces. An example is espaliering, where you take the fruit trees because they're very malleable,
Coolest techniques,
and very artistic. And there's people who specialize in espaliering. There's a whole nother topic, and how that can enhance the appearance of your landscape in a very artful way, but also give you some pleasure of offering some fruit production.
I know some of our podcast listeners have seen that technique where the root, the trunk of the tree is grown close to a fence line, and then the shaping, the sculpting of the branches go along that fencing or along some sort of structure that allows you to create branches that come out and then go horizontally and then grow up. And so you literally have, to use an example that would be easy to, I think, discern, like a menorah.
Menorah candelabra.
Yeah, that sort of thing happening.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really, really wonderful. We need to make a segue here, and we're going to do so with the song that was promised early on from you, redheaded singer man. All right, let's hear it. We've got a springtime song from one Bob Harvey. He doesn't have a guitar here. Before we make our way into containers and spring planters, I sang a little bit just a while ago.
Yes.
I mean, it was just sort of a riff that happened in part of the conversation that we were into at that moment. But now you've got a little something for us.
I can do that because we're also going to talk about, there's things we actually can be planting from seed now.
Yes, there are. All right.
So we'll talk a little about
Let's hear the song.
Okay, here it goes.
Let's go.
Inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. All it takes is a rake and a hoe and a piece of fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, someone bless these seeds I sow. Someone warm them from below till the rains come tumbling down.
That was delightful. I love the Irish lilt that you brought to play as well. That just came out of nowhere. Maybe it's the Guinness sweater that I'm wearing today.
Yeah.
It could be that.
I've been singing that in Irish pubs for about 30 years.
And I'm gathering, gaining yourself a free Guinness or two along the way.
Indeed.
That was pitch perfect there, Bob Harvey. Nice job. Inch by inch, row by row. Now you've got me inspired. We'll have to do a duet sometime soon.
Absolutely. Oh, well, we'll save the best for last.
I'll take the baritone end of things, and you can get up in the tenor range.
Now, I have a client right now, actually, that we help on a lot of fronts, but she's one of those participant clients.
All right, so she gets out
avid gardener. To her, it is a spiritual experience. It's very, very connected to who she is as a person. And we created a wonderful enclosed space that's very artistically done. It acts like a enclosure that's made out of. It has a 4x4 post,
okay,
and a basic structure fence, redwood or cedar, and then it's wrapped in this bamboo. I wouldn't call it fabric, but panels kind of thing. Very, very attractive.
So it's a defined space. So
right.
she's going to take
keeps the critters out.
Yeah.
Because we sink it down into the ground. It takes a very long time for that bamboo to break down.
Sure.
And we can also overlay with some metal stuff and hide it in there. But she has a varmint problem, and they like to eat all the wonderful things that she grows. And we have these raised planters in there that are about 2 feet off the ground, so she doesn't have to bend over so far to plant, that kind of thing. Some of them are even higher.
And she gets some early warmer soil temperature.
Exactly, because the surround is exposed to the
warmth that's coming, the sunshine and what have you.
Exactly.
Warmer outdoor temp.
The bamboo panel actually allows for light and air circulation to go through, so it doesn't cost any of the light from the sun. And when, it's one of those optical illusion things, like when you're walking toward it, you can actually see through it. It's semi-permeable or translucent, if you will.
Sure.
So it's not like a solid block, like putting a solid fence panel.
Yep.
And So, because when she's in there, it's a small space. She doesn't want to get claustrophobic. So she can actually see out as well. And, so she was going to be setting some seeds in by the end of this week. And
good for her.
Just some things like kale, our peas, radishes, spinach. They can be planted while the weather is still quite cool, about 50-degree temperature in the soil. And then carrots would be something that comes after more like 60 degrees and above. I don't do a lot of seed planting myself, but this is one example where this is her passion and her love.
She loves it.
So she goes for it, and she gets wonderful, wonderful results. And then that soil in those containers, we don't want it to be wet and drippy and mucky, like sludgy, sticking together. It has to have some crumbliness to it. And that's how you want to plant so the seeds don't rot.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's easy for that to happen if it gets too wet in there. And then you've just lost everything right there. You got to start over. And sometimes it's a little late to start over then.
And then we'll talk about, when we get into our containers, how some of these things, as food producers, actually make great ornamental accents in our containers.
Ooh, that's cool. Let's segue right into it.
Okay.
Let's segue into containers and spring planters.
So,
we're among other places. I would imagine the deck and the front door are probably the two big ones, right? Location wise, I got to think. Yeah.
Well, it's something that I call it instant gratification, and it costs so little. But has huge, huge impact and huge benefits. And that is something that you can see visually. It's the first promise of spring. Mm-hmm. And you can do that with a container. So if the weather were to turn cold and severe and we're going to get a snowstorm, you could slide it inside or throw a sheet over it or something. But this weather this week actually is very conducive to putting things in the containers. And I'll start with the first layer.
Okay.
So we have a pot that we removed the winter debris and greens or whatever we may have had. A lot of folks use dogwood twigs in their holiday, Christmas, winter displays. Yellow twig, red twig, dogwood. Now, if that was fresh, cut last fall when they went in the pots, what I do is I recycle them.
And what are you doing with them?
I take them, I set them aside when I clean out all the other stuff. Then I take them and I make a fresh cut on them, about 2 or 3 inches up, and see that they're still quite meaty in there, that they haven't dried out.
Okay.
If they were moist through the winter. Dogwood's one of the easiest things to root. So what we've had happen is these actually, over time in the spring, will
start setting some roots in there. Even in your container.
So we're going to get 3 benefits out of one good decision. And this category of dogwood, when you do this, you had the winter benefit. Now we're in spring. We made fresh cuts, arrange them in there, and then we add the next layer of things that I'm going to talk about. And then they will, so it's first week of April now. You could leave those in through most of the summer if you wanted to, because what's going to happen is the color of the red twig, when those sticks start to fire up, that they're alive and they set roots in, they naturally turn back to green.
Okay.
And not only do they do that, but then they start to generate leaves, which will, in some cases, produce little dogwood flowers. So there's really fun things. The other thing you can do is they're very malleable. You can braid them. You can trim them. You can do, whatever kind of artistic design you want to do with them. And then, so that gives us some height and some structure. Now, we don't stop there. That's just one example of how you can use one item basically over half the year.
Right. That's some great recycling.
Yes. And then the next thing, some people will do it with the birch stems and stalks and stuff like that, but they're not going to get you through the summer. They're mostly, they're not going to root. The next thing is the mid layer, what we can add in there that shows that spring is coming. And I like to put in things like bulbs that have been put into pots and forced. And you can find them at a lot of the home garden stores and even Home Depot, Lowe's, those places. They'll get them in a short window of time. And I sink the whole pot in the ground. I don't bother removing them and all that because I think it disrupts the rooting process.
Gotcha.
Because they haven't been in there very long.
Sure.
So I leave well enough alone. It also helps to hold some moisture. Sink it below the soil level so you don't see the pots. And I arrange those in the pot. And then tulips, all different kinds of tulips. There's early, mid, and late blooming tulips. So if you're lucky enough to know what varieties and you know your varieties, you can actually extend the bloom period of the pot. Temperatures on the cool side will extend it as well.
Sure.
You can also do branches of forsythia and cherry, the cherry family, the almond family, the flowering almond. Those buds will open up. Quince, flowering quince. Make fresh cuts, make sure they're really moist, stick them in there, and they just add a beautiful, beautiful display. And then...
will the pussy willows hold some moisture if you cut some of those branches too? Okay.
Yep. Some people already have them in their backyard. Go out and cut them and stick those in, and they will also, in many cases, the right conditions, they'll green up, and they will actually produce leaves. So the pussy willows are very, very... showy, and there's different categories. There's all kinds of cultivars of pussy willow that can be used. Some of them have red stems, black catkins, white catkins, big ones, little ones. So the bulbs, daffodils, another example of something that shoots up about a foot to a foot and a half tall, multiple blooms. And the neat thing about these bulbs is in the right conditions, after they've bloomed, you can set them in your gardens. In an area where you know they'll be undisturbed the rest of the season, do not cut the greens off. Let them die out naturally, fertilize them. And if you're lucky, you'll get more blooms next year, particularly with daffodils and hyacinths, but not so much with the tulips. And then cold weather, something to drip over the edge of the pot. So we talk about production in terms of some benefits. I actually plant some herbs and some cold tolerant herbs in my pots.
What would those be?
Perennials that can be used in the landscape later. In the perennial category, the whole Lamium family is absolutely fabulous to throw in a pot. The Heuchera and Heucherella family, wonderful perennials that show really well in containers and then just move really nicely.
Put them right in the ground.
In some cases, people have done some things like with roses and things like that. You can do it with certain cultivars or varieties that would make a smooth transition into the garden. And things to hang over.
You mentioned herbs. What would be some of those herbs?
You could use things like mint because it will eventually take over and go crazy. But in the early spring stages, lemongrass, lemon balm.
You might want to be careful about the mint, like you said, transferring that. You probably just want to keep that in the pot.
Right. You want it in a solid container, but it adds aromatic dimension and nice texture. Then I use kale seedlings, Swiss chard.
Oh, sure.
Phenomenal.
Sure. And a great color balance there, too.
We were doing that this week. We already and we put them in between some of those other things that will eventually get removed, and then we'll interplant with other things and leave those go.
Yeah, you get the earthy, dusky tones that come from the chard and from the kale, and then you balance those out with the green, and then the colors that'll come from the tulips and the daffodils, as you mentioned. That's beautiful.
And your lettuces.
Sure.
There's so many beautiful lettuces in the reds and the spotted and radicchio, all that stuff, arugula. Some of them, and then the crucifery family of those edibles. If you leave them in long enough, they actually bolt, which in the garden we don't particularly want because it changes the taste as well as takes all the energy out of the part that we want to eat. But in an ornamental setting, it's fabulous.
Right, it can't bolt too far when it's in a container.
No, you get these nice big stalks of yellow flowers and things like that. So it can be an ever-changing thing just over the course of 3 or 4 weeks. in those containers.
Which
until
again,
you want things.
You want it to have. You
Yep.
want it to have some of that change, some of that dimensionality that we talked about at the
Throw
beginning
in
of the
some
podcast.
of the ivies. If you have indoor ivy that house plants, the ilex family, different kinds of Algerian ivy, Swedish ivy, those things. You can start throwing them out. If they get a little nipped or whatever, they just recover. They purple up a little bit in color, but they survive. And then for color, again, we go back to the viola pansy category, where those are they don't mind the cooler weather. They've already been propagated. In most cases, hopefully they've set them out after they've gotten them propagated in the greenhouses to start to what we call harden off a little bit, so they get used to that cooler temperature, and they toughen up a little bit for the cold. And little birdhouses, you can get very, very cutesy.
Little decorative stuff that really,
it can be
a little garden gnome or
right.
something like that.
Well, but because we do different settings, both in private and commercial, so you can do it to align with whatever the theme is of the business style of the home.
Oh, sure.
And those little extra things are really, really, really fun.
So you want to think about layers. That's the biggest thing. Like you said, the dogwoods in the back, some of those bulbs and other things that are going to shoot up and give us some nice green stalking and then some beautiful colors. And then a layer that's going to be a little more low-leveled and droop over the front perhaps or something along those lines. So you've got that backdrop, that middle ground, and then that foreground. And you can mix and match and do a lot of different things depending on what you like.
Yeah. If one of the things I really enjoyed doing was the red twig dogwood, and then I would throw in white bleeding hearts that were just coming up as perennials.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Very, very attractive.
That
very
red
elegant.
and white contrast.
Yes. And then you just move those right into the garden.
Yeah.
In fact, in some cases, we'll lift them back out of the garden and put them in the pot again. So, after you get about 100 of them in your yard, you think, okay, I think I can recycle these.
That would be recycling.
Re-recycle.
Re-recycling. I like that idea. Well, I certainly learned something new on the container side of things with the dogwood stems. Yeah. I mean, the fact that they'll last and persist across the winter in many cases, and that also those rascals will take root once again, given that they still have, like you said, after you trim off the bottom 2 or 3 inches, that you still have some vibrancy and some life there, that you put those things back in the pot and let those find a root, and you'll start changing the color of the red back to the green as spring makes its way through the weeks ahead, and then get some green buds coming out. Yep. That's just fantastic.
Are you familiar with the curly willow? Do you know? Okay, it's a curly, or some people call it contorted willow or corkscrew willow.
Okay.
And
I've heard it.
We're in a
that.
zone.
I've heard
in fact, a stone's throw away from our location here is one of the largest corkscrew willows I've seen. They do grow here. They will survive our, for the most part, our climate and the right microclimate. And it's willow branches, like you think of a weeping willow, but these would be branches that would stand more upright, but they're curly and twisted. And they come in shades of green, orangey red color, rusty color, and they will do the same thing that the dogwood branches will do under the right conditions. They will grow leaves. And a lot of folks who like curly willow in their garden landscape design, they can plant those because they're hard to find, the shrubs. Actually, they're not marketed a lot in our area. There's exceptions. There's some places that carry the really highly unusual things, but those things will sprout. And what's really neat is because some of your stakes are of these willows, if they're 4 or 5 feet tall, they become living trellises.
Oh, sure.
So then you can train some of your annual vines in your containers
to go
up
on that willow,
or next to a house.
Great. Sure.
Or it doesn't have to be just in a container, but next to a house or whatever. And they can be really, really fun. A lot of times we'll use our winter stakes, or winter decor of twigs that maybe don't survive and generate leaves. We'll use them for staking in the garden or in the vegetable garden or whatever they'll work for that too.
Because they're a solid piece of wood. You can use them.
Not necessarily the strongest, but depends on what the
plant is that you need to stake up there. We have occupied yet another wonderful hour of the Landscape and Garden Show with Bob and BT. Now, there's some topics that we were hoping to get to that we didn't get to. Kids and gardening, California, some early planting how-tos, and then also, I don't know if we discussed this at the beginning of the show on the podcast here, but it did come up in the room as we were getting things planned and started, critters and varmints.
Yeah.
And so we're going to pick up steam on all of those topics when you join us next week on the Alive and Social Network. If you've got an idea for a name for this show, like we said, or if you have any questions at all, or if you have song suggestions.
Yes.
Pass
or if you'd
those
like
along.
to come in and sing with us.
Sing along with us. Come join
I
us.
sing in the garden.
Come join us. Email Bob Harvey from Edelweiss Design at designers, plural, designers at edelweissdesign.com. And my name is Brian Turner. You can reach me at btvoice, BEETEA voice at gmail.com. Another wonderful week on the podcast side of things, Bob Harvey.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to next week.
We'll see you then.